the best human machine teaming scenarios, especially it started off with the defense technologies at this moment. So now, we primarily work on the cognitive research for the defense technology. So we actually particularly focus on these stresses on the normal human being. It starts with many emotional stresses, including approach withdrawal behavior, positive negative affect, trait anxiety, and the depression and PTSD. PTSD is a very, very important stress that DRDO focuses on. And also the intervention technique like a mindfulness. Then we also work on a lot of the various working memory issues, especially the deficit of working memory and the attentions, and then various vision-related neurocognitive measures. Then we work on the motor intention decoding for developing the cognitive exoskeleton. So the capabilities we have in DRDO is the simultaneous EEG, fMRI, NIRS, and eye tracking, and the VR and AR facilities with the TDCS stimulation capabilities, and also simultaneous EMG and IMU, FSR, EEG systems. So in the subsequent slides, I will briefly present some of the work which are carried out as a system and also published on the some of the few aspect of the system has been published on the literature. So this is one of our product which we developed in DRDO, which is capable of tracking the real-time cognitive capabilities, particularly the working memory, which is a cognitive load assessment and cognitive fatigue and behavioral issues and the target detection. So for this, actually, as we see in the chart here, we have gone ahead with estimating the changes in the EEG information through the microstates, and which are mapped with the simultaneously acquired fMRI information and identify the key feature, a very critical feature, which are related to the cognitive assessment that we are interested in, especially the 4 parameter which I mentioned. Then we passed it down to the deep learning technique. Those parameters that we assessed has been passed on to the deep learning technique for a classification, and then we basically made a system out of it, and it was evaluated immensely with around 400 people, and it is at the verge of actually being deployed in some other system in the pilot selection and monitoring. Some of the aspects of the systems are published in the following articles. So the second work that we carried out is the loss of situational awareness. And if you look into the literature, this is one of the primary reasons the aviation accident happened when the issue is not at the machine side. When it is in the human side, almost 40 to 80% of the time, it is the loss of situational awareness happened at the pilot is actually reason for the aviation accident. And what is the situational awareness? It is basically a cognitive ability of an individual in perceiving and attending the surrounding information and taking a decision. And it requires very high emotional balance and cognitive state, and also to have a capability to execute the hard decisions. So almost the documented actually like information is that minimum 2 aviation accident happens every year due to this particular issue. And even if you look into our own the past record, we unfortunately lost our CDS, General Bipin Rawat, due to the loss of situational awareness by the pilot who was flying the helicopter at that moment. And he was not having any other cognitive issues, and he was one of the best pilot of the services. But still, the situation led to the condition where he lost the situational awareness and had an accident. So we looked into all the reason which lead to the loss of situational awareness, and it includes the attention deficit which are caused by the frontoparietal connectivity modulates, and emotional balance resultant from the frontal and subcortical connectivity, and mind wandering, like as you do the task, and if the mind wandering dominates because of the very higher enhancement of the frontal areas, or deprivation of sleep, development of the cognitive fatigue and the cognitive overload, which results the very high frontoparietal, frontovisual and temporal connectivity, and also like a spatial disorientation and acute hypoxia. So in case of CDS, what happened was the spatial disorientation, which led to actually the situational awareness loss in the pilot. And the final option, the reason is the perceptual loss, which basically like you lose the visual and parietal cortical information in the decision making. So in our research, actually we focused on how does actually the emotional as well as the attention mechanism controls and lead to the loss of situational awareness. And this work has been published in the Human Factor Journal in 2020. And this is the only publication having explored the fMRI information and went into the brain information to identify the root cause of situational awareness. So what we see here is how each one of the area interacts and gets modulated as a result of loss of situational awareness. So in this work, we have identified the pre-task resting alpha symmetry as well as pre-task resting frontal alpha symmetry as a core marker, which could be explored as a marker to predict the loss of situational awareness in the pilot when they are flying. So we are planning to take further project on that with a collaboration of many international defense technology developers. And this actually has been seen and tested also in multiple people. So then we also worked on understanding the emotional mechanisms of the human brain, a normal individual. Particularly, we worked on actually identifying the affect mechanism and approach and withdrawal mechanism as it deals with as a precursor for many of the subsequent actually like cognitive deficit like situational awareness as well as the cognitive load. And for this purpose, we looked into understanding how the frontal asymmetry or hemispherical asymmetry of the human brain works. So what we see on the right side of the slide basically explains the methodology which we have devised in our work, which is basically capable of tracking the, uh, the loss or for that matter, that negative and positive affect elicitation on the human brain. So this gives us the information whether the emotional state or withdrawal emotional state, which could be collaborated with his enhancing cognitive load or loss of attentional mechanism of an individual. So then subsequently, we went on as actually like many of the our focus is on the empowering the soldiers, primarily when they are deployed to the very high demanding locations like a Siachen or border, which is far away from actually their core family. So they go into a lot of emotional depression and with that when they involve in actually like multiple combat scenario, they develop the PTSD. So it is one of our core focus to understand and identify them in advance, so that actually like it can be help. We can actually devise a helping mechanism to bring them back to the field, or make a mechanism that they go with a actually like rehabilitation programs. So this particular work actually deals with 53 individuals who are actually gone and identified as a heavy depression people, some of them having a PTSD also. And we acquired a simultaneous EEG information and did neurocognitive modeling. And we eventually identified the interaction between the medial temporal lobe with the basal ganglia functional connectivity modulates due to the very high trauma and the depression. So we have actually developed a attention-based deep learning model to predict them in detail in the beginning only, which is very much earlier state, which actually like precedes our psychological identification. And so we found a very good accuracy coming out of it. And this work also we are going ahead in developing a system to be deployed in our services. Then we developed in order to in order to actually integrate the fMRI information with the EEG, which is the most difficult part. So we developed actually hemodynamic reorganization method, which is totally a neuro computational approach, which basically collaborates the hemodynamic elicitation, which is picked up by the fMRI, to be with every actually like voxel with a EEG. So that this work has been, it's a new neurocomputational model published in the brain connectivity. So then most of our actually like the model that we developed, although it started out with the paradigms at the computer level and then in the fMRI console with a visual cue level, but at the end we need to deploy it in the real-time scenarios where actually people will be using it in the working condition. So one of our application is to deploy it with a pilot so that whenever they go through any cognitive deficit, the system will be immediately will pick it up and then inform the pilot or their actually like the control station to basically help them taking a remedy measures. So for this purpose, we went on to do the LCA, the pilot simulators, where we carried out the experiment which are shown in the slide. Then we put our algorithm which are developed, which I presented in the earlier slide, and we identify how well actually it is actually picking up the cognitive load in a different condition and approach and withdrawal assessment as I presented in the previous slide, how those marker actually picks up the each one of the withdrawal and approach behavior and as well as the loss of situational awareness. So what we found, the approach that we devised using the simultaneous EEG fMRI and the deep learning technique basically provided an excellent translation to the simulator based data, which allowed us to basically be sure of the technology that we developed and the system which came out of it to be inducted in the real world scenario, which will happen in the couple of years from now. So these are the actually like the cognitive engagement or elicitation that we identified in the simulator, which collaborated very equally with actually the identification of brain activation in the fMRI information in the area. So as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of people right now works on cognitive exoskeleton. So what it does is basically like we think of moving any part of the brain, and just by thinking, we should be able to have a robotic arm fixed in our hand, robotic supporting system fixed in our hand or leg, or an independent robotic arm should be able to perform that particular task. So for this purpose, we need to have a capability to pick up those brain activation related to the motor intention through the EEG and then associate it with the neuromuscular information which are picked up by the EMG as well as a food sensor, then pass it on to the deep learning model, which will be actually predicting the motor intention and that can be passed on to the robotic arm. So this slide basically presents the entire methodology that we have used in this study, as well as the result of the accuracy of this cognitive exoskeleton system. So we further involved as we primarily focus on understanding the human brain. Although we are employing fMRI information and EEG information, EEG information, they only deal with the neuronal activity as well as the hemodynamic elicitation caused by the neuronal activity. But if you dive deep into the human brain, it basically is the neuronal activity itself is actually triggered by the underlying the neurometabolic activities, which are very, very difficult to track using the traditional EEG and fMRI information. So we wanted to go on to study them for primarily one reason. That reason is how does every individual different in terms of human brain activation or subtle differences? Why are we requiring it? So when we looked into like the reason why we went on to is very simple and straight. That is, when we started deploying our the cognitive marker related BCI system or cognitive exoskeleton system or cognitive loading system, we identified the markers are slightly getting different in every individual based on their cognitive structural changes or their cellular changes, or their metabolic changes, or actually like certain changes in the stress that they experience, which are very, very important to pick it up. So for that purpose, we went on to study a multimodal extensive study where we carried out almost now it reached up to 200 cases to study individual brain structural differences in terms of how does it affect the marker, cellularity differences, how does it affect the marker, and metabolic differences, how does it affect the marker. And we got the excellent result. And we also went on to study the cortical communication information with their serum metabolites, which actually leads to identify the neurometabolic changes. And there we found that the EEG transition probability heavily associated with the neurometabolites picked up in the serum, as well as whatever the marker changes that we observed in the what is it called frontal cortical interactions and the limbic interaction with the subcortical region has a very high influence or correlation with many of the neurometabolites that we observed in the neurometabolic studies. This is one of the baseline information which we wanted to include in our model, which will be a state-of-the-art approach, which will help us in deploying the technology that we are developing all across the people, because otherwise every brain is slightly different from each other. So unlike the system that, like if I develop a robot, when I manufacture the robot, they are manufactured same. So the control system can be the same. All I require is that how to process the sensor information and different environmental changes around it, which modulates the sensorial information, multimodal information, so that the control system operates the way in which the robot need to be operated. But there will not be any change between each robot. But unfortunately, when you develop any human centric system or cognitive centric system, every brain is different. So the assessment of the human brain need to be understood with respect to the individual differences of the each people. So this is carried out by this particular approach of the neurometabolic. So now, what I personally feel like anybody who carries out R&D in taking way forward for the neuro or cognitive technologies for HMT or for that matter any applications. Uh, so first of all, they need to have an answer for, like if you're looking at the system technology to be developed for mass, for anybody, it's not only the prototype that we're talking about in the local lab environment. So if you wanted to do that, first and foremost, the study that we need to do is how does neurocognitive elicitation varies within each difference or within each individual. Then actually like one has to go down to the identifying the cognition that your focus of interest, like for DRDO, these 5 are the primary focus. But for an institute like a CDAC or any other academic institute, I think actually they will have much more flexibility and freedom to choose more cognitive domains. Then the other thing is actually development of the next generation hardware, which is currently missing in cognitive technology development. We are still using the medical grade devices, which are very expensive and also very sensitive. So that cannot actually can be recommended for to be used for a mass. Nobody can spend 30 to 40 lakh rupees to use the system, or if they go for a very cheaper one, it doesn't work at all. So somebody has to develop like